Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to Charting with Dan. I'm your host, Dan Murrell, and I'm switching sides because I'm an agent of chaos.
Wow. Dangerous.
This is Lon Harris.
How's it going?
Thank you for joining me, sir.
Always love to be here. Talking charts.
Talking charts and talking Jordan Peele.
Yes.
Us opened this weekend domestically and in many places around the world. And even with, as always, tracking going into a weekend, the closer you get, the more people sort of say, like, oh, I think it's going to be this. And some people are saying, like, 50, maybe 60, 65 million. Us, not only did it open above what people went into the weekend thinking, it opened above the estimates that came out yesterday. So in every sense of the word, Us surprised a lot of people with the strength of its opening. Over $71 million for an opening weekend. That's more than twice the opening weekend of Jordan Peele's last film, Get Out. And that's significant for a number of reasons, which we will go into, both in the genre and the films based on an original concept. It did a lot of work, but Lon, just overall, did it surprise you that it opened that highly?
I mean, it's a surprising number in that nobody was predicting that it was going to do that big. But I have to say, at this point, we've now seen that over and over again. Mm-hmm. Female-driven movies and movies driven by black audiences tend to have numbers that come out that are very below what they end up doing. It seems like the estimates are always a little off for those movies. So, yeah, I did think this was going to have a big weekend.
Well, and also the horror genre, which traditionally opens strong, but drops off.
Right.
And a lot of people, when people saw the numbers on Friday and Saturday, which were very high, if you look at the cinema score for Us, it was a B, which in the world of cinema score is... You have to judge everything on a lot of sliding scales.
Right.
On the world of cinema score, a B is kind of like for an average movie. However, for a horror movie, it's actually pretty good, because horror movies generally, though there's some outliers like A Quiet Place,
right,
that score a little higher, but horror movies generally score lower. Hereditary got an atrociously bad cinema score.
I mean, there's that thing that a big chunk of the horror audience is looking for a very specific kind of experience when they go see a horror movie, and movies that are outliers. A Quiet Place. There was that what was that A24 one?
It Comes at Night.
It Comes at Night.
The Witch.
And then this one, The Witch, Babadook, where they're movies that are sort of, there's more going on than just jump scares, straight slasher horror. They tend to be a little bit more divisive.
So considering the fact that it is a horror movie, and even amongst the horror movie fans, it's a bit, Us is a little heady.
Yeah.
It's a little headier than your average horror film. The B cinema score... it's kind of a wash. It's You can read into it, you cannot read into it. What it does show, though, by the fact that that Sunday overperformed, even the estimate on Sunday, was that word of mouth wasn't necessarily negative across all forums. Obviously, looking at the cinema score, there were some people walking out saying, like, I don't know how I feel about this movie.
Right.
However, there appear to be a lot of other people that are very enthusiastic about the film. It's going to be I'm going to watch this because, horror a lot of times in its second week drops like a rock, and I'm going to be very interested to see what Us does this weekend. Especially, Dumbo's not really. It's competing in the anti-market as far
it's
as
not
like
direct challenge to Us,
but it is a challenge in the sense that it's another big release. I'm going to be very curious to see what happens to Us this weekend.
There's a few things that are interesting that are going on here, because I feel like even if this is a movie that the word of mouth is not necessarily like universally strong, it's a conversation driving movie. Like, a lot of people around America are going to be going to their offices and talking about Us. Yeah. And that is going to, even if the response is sort of negative, that's going to drive curiosity, make people interested to check it out for themselves. And I think similar to what we saw with Get Out, that it's just the kind of movie that people are going to reference. People are going to know what is being tethered and what's that all about. And I think that's going to come into play. And then the other thing that I think that we're going to see, this movie is not going to be like a traditional horror movie. I think Jordan Peele now is a big enough name and has
his own brand at this point.
I think at this point there are going to be a lot of people who may not ordinarily go see a horror movie in theaters who will nonetheless be like, well, I want to check out what Jordan Peele's doing.
Well, Us landed in the top 5 on several different categories historically. Let's look first at horror films. Us was a top 5 opening in the horror genre, depending on, and this is always the asterisk, what you count as horror. Some people said it was number 3. I'm saying it's number 4. Sometimes I have counted I Am Legend, sometimes I haven't. It's very hard to determine what exactly is horror and what's not horror. We've covered it on this show before.
Sure.
So for the intensive purposes of this show,
I think I Am Legend. There's zombies in it.
Us was the number 4 highest rated horror movie opening of all time. Keep in mind, 2 of the top 5 openings, actually 3 of the top 5 openings, have happened in the last 2 years with It, Halloween last year, and now Us. So the horror genre is something that is breaking out, probably because studios are in some cases putting big resources behind pushing them, putting a little more behind the budget, putting a lot behind advertising and promotion. And then you have people like your Jason Blums, your Jordan Peels, that are coming up in the horror world that are really lending a lot of artistic credibility to the genre as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna talk more about it, but just going back to that graphic we were just looking at of the top 5, the only original film concept in the top 5. It's a Stephen King book. I Am Legend, a Richard Matheson story.
Yep.
Halloween, a reboot of a 70s movie. World War Z was what, a graphic novel or a novel? Yeah. So Us is the only one that was like, a person had an idea for a movie and made a movie.
And not only in the horror genre, that's a great segue, Lon, because there has been a lot of talk, and I was reading a lot this weekend, and this actually its overperformance based on the estimates going into over $71 million plus bumped Us into the top 5 opening of all time for any film based on an original concept. Now, what does that mean? That means a movie that's not based on a book, it's not a sequel, it's not based on a true story. It's literally somebody sat down and said, I have this original idea that's springing from my brain.
This should be a movie.
Us is a top 5 in that category domestically. Secret Life of Pets is the number 1. Inside Out, Avatar from James Cameron, number 3, followed by Zootopia, and then Us at number 5. As I mentioned, because it overperformed its estimates, that's what bumped it into the top 5 in this category. But Lon, we were talking earlier, and I thought I would point out as well, obviously a lot of animated films in that. If you're looking at live action, the top 5 openings for live action films based on an original idea are Avatar, Us, Bruce Almighty, 2012, the disaster movie, and Inception. And they're way far down the list of the highest openings of all time. When you're going into the charts and looking at the highest grossing and highest opening films of all time, the number of original ideas in there, it becomes very starkly obvious how many of the big openings are relying on films that are based on something else or a sequel to something else or an adaptation of something else.
And, I mean, we saw, Avatar and Secret Life of Pets, movies that are aiming for family audiences, everybody. Us is an R-rated horror movie.
Yeah. What it's doing in that sense is, and as is It. It is an R-rated horror movie, and you're seeing all of these dividing lines that people drew around certain films and what their performances could be are largely just kind of slowly dissolving and phasing away. And again, I think a big part of it is that there are some projects that studios have a little faith in and a little trust in. Even if you look at A Quiet Place and saying like, okay, we're going to give you the resources to make this. They're not going to be $50 million resources, but they're giving it to artists that can pull off that vision, which is what I like to see. And then looking at Jordan Peele, as we mentioned, it is his second film. He also ranked up, if you look at domestic debuts from Black directors, Jordan Peele, it is also a top 5 opener behind Black Panther, The Fate of the Furious, Straight Outta Compton, and Fantastic Four from director Tim Story. All 4 of those top 5 have been since 2015. So for 10 years, Fantastic Four was at the top of that list until Straight Outta Compton came out. And then F. Gary Gray has 2 of those films.
I was about to say, he's Fate of the Furious and Straight Outta Compton.
Jordan Peele and then Ryan Coogler, obviously, with Black Panther. So, again, studios handing the reins over to artists, not just from diverse genres, but from diverse backgrounds, is paying off in actual dollars, not only good movies.
You also have to look at that. I mean, just again, to reinforce like how amazing Jordan Peele's arrival on the scene has been. It's only his second movie. I mean, all of these other guys, like Coogler came up doing Fruitvale Station. He made Creed after this. F. Gary Gray's been making movies since the 80s or early 90s. Tim Story had done the Barbershop films before doing Fantastic Four. He just came out of nowhere. He was a sketch comedian. and came out of nowhere and has made these two just blockbuster, really event movies. It's astounding.
Yeah,
it's really remarkable.
And there were a lot of people that were mixed on Us, and it's the kind of movie that is not going to send everyone out universally feeling the same thing. I was a big fan of the movie. Mm-hmm. I talked to a lot of people over the weekend, a lot of people that saw it and either loved it or had some issues with it, and I completely understand it. But for my money, I think that Jordan Peele is... I can't wait to see now anything that he does. I never thought he was going to be a one-hit wonder. Right. But I love what he did with Us. I love the choices he makes in that movie. I know a lot of people weren't as big of fans, and I understand that. But he's... To have a filmmaker like him who, it seems like no matter what he does, love it or hate it, it's going to be interesting. And he's continuing to explore his own ideas and do his own thing. So often now, we're in this system where a person will come out and make a really fascinating, great, interesting movie on their own, and then immediately get sucked into the system. Yeah. And now they're gonna make Transformers 18 or whatever. Right. And that's fine. I like those movies. There's no problem with making big summer event movies. I get it. I would want to do that if I was a director. But it's so nice that there are still people who are like, I'm going to just keep following my own vision, at least for a while, and make a few more movies of this kind before I go do a Marvel thing or a DC thing. And he's lending his talent and his reputation to the Twilight Zone TV show. So he's dabbling a little bit in this idea of I'm going to boost this existing IP. But it's working on a lot of interesting TV shows and Black Klansman he produced. Yeah. And I dig that he's using his voice for that. But just the fact that he's not doing the Colin Trevorrow, he's not Josh directing Trank, Doctor Strange 2. He's not immediately taking this left turn into the studio system and signing over to all these franchises. We're going to get a few more Jordan Peele movies, and that's really refreshing. I'm super excited to see what he does next. So Us, unquestionably across the board, a huge success on opening weekend, and we'll see how it does in these next few weeks as we all head toward as we like to call them sometimes, 2 or 3 times a year, it's what we call a box office black hole. Yeah. And that's what Avengers Endgame is going to be. It sucks in all of the money, and you really cannot escape from it. But there's still a few things to come out between now and then. I'm curious to see how Us does. Shazam coming out in a couple weeks. Yeah. Really strong reviews and word of mouth from the fan screenings this past weekend. I was a big fan as well. I'm a big fan. So a lot of box office ground to cover between here and Avengers. Let's look at the rest of the top 5. Captain Marvel was number 2, and its third weekend it dropped a little under 50%. In its third week, it is now the 10th highest domestic grosser in the MCU. It's going to pass Guardians of the Galaxy and Spider-Man Homecoming this week to move up that list. And then it's got a little bit more ground to cover. If it can get to $400 million, it'll be up there around Civil War. A lot of it just depends on how these next few weeks go. Wonder Park, in its second week, dropped 44%. It's grossed a little under $30 million. The problem with that is that movie has a budget of just of about $100 million. That is a big miss for Paramount, and we've talked about Paramount on the show over the last couple of years. They have taken some really high-profile hits, not the good kind. In the last few years, they've had some success stories too, with A Quiet Place and Mission Impossible Fallout. Yeah. But they've had some high-profile. Some tough times, and Wonder Park looks like it's going to be another one of those. In fairness, though, it's sort of a kickoff. There is a Wonder Park TV series this fall coming to Nickelodeon. So they can at least explain it as part of this is promoting the new show Wonder Park, so it's not a total loss. But yeah, I'm sure they were hoping to make a lot more on it. If Wonder Park turns into Paw Patrol, and then it doesn't matter how this movie did. Right. It's all about ancillaries and toys and books and everything. Yeah, also a big week for Nickelodeon with that Dora the Explorer trailer everybody's talking about. Yeah. All right. Number 4 was 5 Feet Apart. Little teen weepy. I guess teen drama. It's the latest, they're all sick and they get to know each other in the hospital movie. It dropped 35% in its second week. That's not a bad drop at all. You see that a lot with films that have not the blockbuster audience. Some people will wait till the second week. It had a budget of about $7 million. So there you go. That's not performing too badly based on that budget. And then How to Train Your Dragon 3 is in the top 5 for the fifth week, probably the last week. Even though it is in the top 5 and has been for several weeks, it looks like it is not, or it's very possible that it will not surpass the gross of How to Train Your Dragon 2, which itself did not surpass the gross of the first How to Train Your Dragon film. So probably a good time to put a bow on that series.
Wrap that one up.
Much beloved series of films, but you don't see the growth associated with a lot of films.
It is a little surprising because that is a series that it is not dropped off in quality from the first one. So there is a diminishing enthusiasm, even though the quality has remained very high.
Yeah.
What can you do?
What can you do? Except
there's so much competition out there. There's so many movies coming out.
But that's another franchise, as you mentioned with Wonder Park, that has an animated series, that has a multi-armed merchandising and franchising machine.
Yeah, those dragons aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They'll be around.
No, the fact that it underperformed a little bit it probably means we're not going to get any more movies, but they have plenty of other
At least for a while.
edges.
Maybe in 5 or 7 years we'll get a reboot like Your dragon is trained.
Your dragon is trained. How to Train Your Human. Coming 2027.
That's how they'll do it, yeah.
Top per screen is a film that was on 4 screens this weekend called Hotel Mumbai. This is the feature debut from an Australian filmmaker named Anthony Maris and stars Dev Patel and Armie Hammer. It is a dramatization of the 2008 terrorist attacks that occurred in Mumbai at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel. I have not seen this film, but it opened.
It's at the ArcLight right now. I was thinking about checking it.
It's at the ArcLight. I believe, I was looking at some information. I believe that ArcLight Features is one of the producers behind the movie.
In fact, they are.
Makes sense why it would be playing
Hence
there
it's at the ArcLight, yeah.
Let's take a look at the worldwide box office. Now, my calculations split this a little differently than everybody else because based on, again, the projections yesterday, I mentioned that Us sort of overperformed from what they had estimated that it did yesterday. Based on that, everyone was saying that Captain Marvel had spent its 3rd week as the top worldwide grosser. But based on the numbers that I pull, plus the numbers that came in that adjusted Us up a little bit, I actually have Us a little bit barely ahead by just over $1 million of Captain Marvel. Wow. So my projection has Us as the #1 movie worldwide, with Captain Marvel just behind. I'm sure a lot of people have it the other way. Either way, they both did well. Either way, they both had a good weekend. Yeah. It's a strong showing from both of them. Number 3 is More Than Blue. More Than Blue is a Taiwanese remake of a Korean film that is performing exceptionally well and has been in China. It did very well last weekend. It was one of the top 5 worldwide grossers last weekend.
I was reading a little about this week. It's a boom time for Taiwanese cinema because a lot of movie companies, including Netflix, they're legally not allowed to operate in China, but they can operate in Taiwan, which also has a Mandarin-speaking population. So that's where you go to generate the content that then gets distributed by other companies in China for your company that can't legally make Chinese content. So that's why we're seeing a massive increase in funding for Taiwanese original films this year.
That sounds like its own movie.
Isn't that, it's fascinating, right?
It is.
Because Netflix, I just read about this because Netflix just bought its 2nd Taiwanese original series because they're like, well, we're going to pump a lot of money into Taiwan because we can't go to China.
It's like a backdoor into the
you're
Chinese
still making
market.
It's still in Mandarin, so it's still accessible for a Chinese audience.
Interesting. I'm going to have to read more. I'm going to have to read more about that.
Interesting.
5 Feet Apart and Wonder Park rounded off the top 2, mostly driven by their domestic performances here in the United States. Let's look at the top 10 movies of the year so far worldwide. Captain Marvel, #1. It is closing in on that $1 billion mark. It's about $90 million shy right now. I wouldn't necessarily put it 100% in the bank, although that's about how much it made this last weekend. But I think it's a pretty close to a sure thing that it's going to crack that $1 billion mark. Followed by The Wandering Earth, How to Train Your Dragon 3 closing in on $500 million, which is about where we projected it would probably want to be. Alita Battle Angel, unfortunately, running out of steam as it gets past $400 million. I think it's going to fall a little bit short of the definite safe zone for potentially seeing more of that. That's not to say there's not going to be another one, but it's not going to quite crest, I don't think, the numbers that would have been a definite safe harbor.
Rodriguez, though, he's good at bringing them in under budget. Maybe he'll be able to work it out. Like, he can do it a little cheaper than another filmmaker.
And when you've got James Cameron behind it, too. That's why I never say never. Just looking at the numbers, looking at the budget, there was a certain threshold that... just about everybody agreed it sort of had to get around for it to comfortably
to
say,
sort of guarantee.
Yes,
but it can still Pacific Rim Uprising it.
It could. I would just say, like, right now, there's no guarantee of the sequel. It does not look like it's going to reach that benchmark. The rest of the top 10 unchanged. Crazy Alien and Pegasus, 2 Chinese films. Glass closing in at $250 million. Keep in mind that's on a budget of about $20 to $25 million. Lego Movie 2. Not a big hit.
Stalled out.
Really stalled out. Escape Room and Extreme Job at number 9 and 10. These, we'll probably see a movie or two, Shazam and maybe Dumbo jump into this list, but this whole list is going to get shaken up in about 6 weeks, when Avengers Endgame opens.
And then after that, it's just the whole summer.
And then it's the summer box office.
Every week or two, we're going to have a new list.
The top 10 domestic films for 2019, Captain Marvel, number 1. Us jumps in, debuts at number 7 on the list with its $71 million debut. Isn't It Romantic falls out. We'll see how Dumbo does. The screenings are this week, so the reviews will be hitting this week. I don't know how it's going to do. That's a good question.
And this is anecdotal. I have no evidence, but I feel like there is a lot less buzz around this than most of these Disney live action reboots. And I don't know if that's from Disney, that they're less confident in how this one's going to play, if there's just less interest from the public in Dumbo.
Well, Dumbo is not like Beauty and the Beast.
Right. Dumbo's an older one.
Yes.
It's more like comparable to a Maleficent or a Cinderella versus like a Beauty and the Beast or a Lion King.
Yes.
But still, I feel like the fact that there's one of these big Disney animated live action reboots coming out this week, it doesn't seem like it's out there.
Well, but when you think about Disney, they're 3 weeks removed from the Captain Marvel coming out. They're heavily hyping Avengers Endgame already. You have to wonder if it's just sort of stuck in the middle.
They're
a little
spreading
bit.
themselves too thin.
Maybe so. I don't know. We'll see. That opens this week, as I mentioned, Lon. So this week we got Dumbo hitting theaters. We have The Beach Bum from Harmony Korine. It's shocking to me. It is actually getting a wide release this weekend.
I've seen like trailers.
I am excited to see it, but it's. I would not have pegged that one as a movie that would get an immediate wide release.
Although I do hear that it's a lot more accessible than most of his movies, and it's a straight comedy. It isn't him trying to do like a Gummo where it's got funny things, but it's also very strange. It's more straight ahead, wacky Matthew McConaughey stoner comedy.
Maybe a little more accessible.
So yeah, I think it's more of a crowd pleaser than like Spring Breakers, which is for a certain kind of audience, and other audiences will be left very cold by it.
Also opening in about 1,000 theaters. Literally, I think as far on the other end of the spectrum as you could go is a movie called Unplanned from Pure Flix, which is a abortion-themed pro-life film. So that'll be in 1,000+ theaters. Lon, we've seen these kind of films generally can either sort of go away with a whimper or
sometimes
vastly overperform. So we'll see how that does. Unfortunately,
will it be a Left Behind or a God's Not Dead? That's the question.
We'll see. Unfortunately, Lon, we won't see next week because I will not be here next Monday. I will be away. So there will be no charting next week, but there will be a charting in 2 weeks. Luckily, you have 2 times the charts.
Yeah,
2 times the charts. More to cover. We'll talk about Dumbo.
Sure.
See if there's any other films that broke out, any surprises. But yeah, so no charting next week. My apologies, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with all the box office numbers. Lon, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining me on charting. And also, just quickly, I would really like to say to everyone that reached out about last week's episode, I got the biggest response that I've ever gotten from an episode of the show, and I just wanted to take a second and say that I really do appreciate everybody who reached out on social media and elsewhere. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's the kind of stuff that I like doing, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it too. So thank you for watching this week and every week, and we will see you in 2 weeks with more Charting with Dan.